Awesome. So I just wanted to kind of refresh you guys in terms of some tips and things that you guys are going to need to know for the National Proficiency Awards. I know they've changed recently in terms of the applications and that kind of stuff. And so I'm probably not as current as I should be. It's been a few years since I've had students fill them out and that kind of stuff. And so if there's anything that you want to know specifically, if there's some new rules and that kind of stuff, I may have to dig in a little bit deeper in terms of those, but I can give you just some background on what was successful for me. And let me just a second. I think I got somebody wanting in here. All right. Welcome, Hope. So just, these are just some tips and things that hopefully you can use that will help you as you kind of prepare your applications for the national level. And I'm excited to see that you guys were able to get students through the process, regardless of all the COVID stuff and not being there working with them. I know it's a challenge to get some of these things accomplished with everything going on right now. So let me go ahead and get started here. So just big picture, it's important just to review the application early and start planning early. I know that you guys have already got kind of a bulk of that already completed. And so hopefully you're looking at some of those past winning national applications on FFA.org. They have several that are listed there that hopefully in the next couple of years, they'll add some new applications as the applications are changing and that kind of stuff. So just make sure that you're looking at those, everything that's required. Make sure that you fill out every part of that application. Don't leave anything blank. That's a big piece of it, is just making sure that everything is full, that you've responded to everything appropriately, and then that you've printed it off and made sure that you just really have the time to go through that in a very detailed way in terms of just editing it. And again, make sure that you're checking out those past winning national applications and using those as a model to kind of build your own. One more second, I got somebody else coming in here. All right, let's see, welcome Sarah. So another important piece of this is to not include any records, data, income, expenses, activities, or anything else that happens on January 1st or after the year applying for the degree. Or the application, anything like that. So make sure that everything ends on December 31st, 2019. And so nothing from 2020 can be included on this application, or you're going to be marked as a participant automatically. So make sure that all of your records are ending December 31st, 2019, or you're going to automatically not get considered further if you have information that's going to be there. So that information is not going to apply for this particular award category. So make sure everything that you do ends December 31st. And so even though it's 2020 now, you can't count any of that information. You'll be able to count it for the next year though. Let me see here. So these are just some ways to go about getting to the resources. So if you go to ffa.org, you can click on the Proficiency Resources to see helpful information regarding proficiency scoring rubrics. Make sure that you review the rubrics as you're going through and developing these applications and fine tuning them, making sure that you're hitting everything in terms of the maximum points available. I can't stress how important that is, because when the committee goes through and actually ranks your applications, they're going to have those rubrics there in front of them, and they're going to be referred to them if they have questions a lot. If they run into any discrepancies, they're going to use that rubric as kind of their guide. And so you need to also be familiar with that rubric. Make sure that you are using the correct one, whether it's an entrepreneurship or placement or combination of the two. Make sure that you have those rubrics available, that you're doing everything that you can to make sure that you're really hitting all those points and getting the full kind of range of everything that you're going to need for that. Utilize other resources available, including Proficiency Award handbooks. Those are available on the National FFA website as well. So there's lots of resources. You just have to spend time going through them and reading them and kind of taking and gleaning out those best practices. They are really robust in terms of them, and going through them, I know is kind of a pain, but it can really help your applications if you're willing to put in that work and do that. So yeah, I've already mentioned that a little bit. Try to use all the space provided. And so one thing that I noticed when I was judging, there would be a lot of states that would have just a ton of white space, a ton of space left unused. And that was usually, and I know this sounds really bad, but even if it was a really good application and there was a ton of white space, it makes you think, well, they didn't put all the effort that they could have into this application. And so they could have been more, provide more explanation, provide more insight. And so they didn't really invest the amount of time that they should have. And so take up as much white space as you can. Make sure that you're not running off the page, or that make sure that your text isn't getting cut off, but use all the space available, and make sure that you have it really well written as well. So those are really important pieces. And I know they sound really basic, but when I was judging, there was tons of different, applications that I saw that were just very minimal and had a lot of white space. And those usually get marked as participant really quickly. Use numbers, percentages, and proper terms throughout the application rather than general vague terms. So anytime that you can, you need to work in numbers, percentages, any type of proper names that you can. That's a critical point. And so your numbers need to kind of, be aligned throughout it. So if you use a specific number, it needs to reflect also in what you're reporting in terms of your records. If you're using like money figures or something like that. So, or if you're using a number of hours, make sure that the text matches what's actually reported in your record book as well. There needs to have that congruency between the two. So those are really, really important pieces of that. A lot of people write the text pieces of the application really extremely vague. And that's what really catches them most of the time, is that they need to be more specific in terms of really nailing down what those are. Also demonstrate realistic growth in regard to students' earnings and skills rather than attempting to present unrealistic figures. We're going to talk about this more in a little bit about what that means. But I mean, it's very unrealistic. I mean, I'm not saying that a high school student couldn't earn $1 million, but if they do, you need to spend time justifying why they have that much money and how they've been able to do that, and really show how they've been able to accomplish that just, through your narrative text, and be able to explain all that, or a lot of people aren't going to buy it. I mean, so you need to be as realistic as possible, present what actually happened, and try to make it something that you're trying to fudge a little bit, because it's not going to usually work out so well. Most people can kind of read through that stuff if you're trying to BS them. Let's see. Okay, now this is kind of what I was referring to as well here. Be sure that paid and unpaid work hours do not exceed child labor laws. So this is taken directly from Louisiana child labor laws, and they will look these up if they have a question about your application. If you're saying that your student has worked X amount of hours and they realistically can't do that under child labor laws, they'll look up those in each unique state and what kind of governs them. This is for the state of Louisiana. Youth cannot work more than 3 hours on a school day, 18 hours in a school week, 8 hours in a non-school day, or 40 hours during a non-school week. So I just want to make sure that you have that text available, that you're trying to make sure that your applications align with that as much as possible. I realize that maybe some of your students do work more than 3 hours on a school day, but realistically, you can't report that on your record book, or you're going to get thrown out, because it's against the law. And so if you have anything that's a safety violation or breaks the law on your application, you're going to get DQ'd really, really quickly. And so make sure that you're going through those hours, and that they're not unrealistic, and that they're very much in line with existing child labor laws, or like I said, that's going to get thrown off. Now, in the summertime, that's different. If it's a non-school week or something like that, they can work more. But if it's a school week, the traditional school hours, that kind of stuff, they cannot work more than 3 hours per day. Okay, these are some also really important tips that I want to provide. Make sure that you're using the SMART goal format. These are, kind of congruent throughout national chapter award applications, proficiency awards, anything that you're going to submit to National FFA organization. If you're not familiar with the SMART goal format, you need to be, because if they're not in SMART goal format, they're going to be disregarded pretty quickly as well. So a bad example of a goal is to increase my cattle herd. Now that is a good goal, but in terms of these actual award applications, they're not specific enough. They're not realistic enough. And so you need to be able to specifically demonstrate using numbers and figures and that kind of stuff, how you're going to accomplish it as well. So this would be a better example of how to write that goal. By 2022, I hope to increase the number of Angus cattle in my herd from 27 to 40 through financial support acquired from the U.S. Department of Agriculture loans for $20,000. And so you're specifically saying how much you want to increase your herd by. That's a very specific time that you're going to do that. So you want to do it by 2022. You're very specific in terms of that. And you're also providing information in terms of how you're going to realistically be able to accomplish that and being able to get that loan. So that's a better example of a goal. It's not perfect, but it would definitely score a lot higher than the bad example that I provided you. A bad example of an accomplishment would be like finding one here. I accomplished my goal by increasing the size of my cattle herd. So that's not really specific. That's not really giving you all the details that you need to really make that work. So one big recommendation I have in terms of all of your accomplishments, make sure that you put exceeded or met before you even get into any of your findings. So provide exceeded in uppercase letters so that they know what they're about to read, because these individuals, they're going to be reviewing your applications, are not going to be trying to dig through it. They want to be able to, it just to pop out at them and they see that you met or exceeded your goal really, really quickly. So always put met, MET, or exceeded for every single goal that you have. If you didn't meet your goal, say, for example, coronavirus wiped you out or something, that wouldn't be a realistic thing that's going to be on your record book since this is from 2019. But for next year, you could say that, and you can provide rationale for why you didn't meet your goal because of some type of natural disaster or pandemic or whatever it may be. So you need to be able to provide text in terms of why you didn't meet that goal. And so, and that's a realistic as well, but most of the time you need to provide findings and stuff that you have either met or exceeded to be able to be realistically competitive at the national level. So in terms of finding one here, exceeded, in 2017, I secured a USD loan for $50,000. I used this money to purchase additional 20 Angus heifers and 1 Angus bull. As a result, I've been able to increase profits for my SAE over the past 2 years by more than $25,000. And so in that finding, we have very specific figures. We know exactly how much the cattle herd increased. We know how much the loan was, and we know how much profit we've been able to increase as a result of getting these loans and this initial goal that we had. And so that's a better example of an actual finding. So if you're not, go back and really be critical of your goals and your findings and make sure that they are very, very quantitative. So they are using numbers, they're really using times in terms of when you accomplish them, and they're providing very specific details, and they're not very vague, because vague goals and vague findings are going to get you knocked out really quickly as well. So like I said, and be sure to use the words met or exceeded before you begin the narrative text for every single finding that you have. So those are really important aspects that can really set your application apart if those reviewers can just really pick them really quickly in terms of whether you met or exceeded those goals, so the judges don't have to really search through it and try to determine themselves. They already know it really quickly. So be sure that all pages on the actual application are printed on regular 8.5 by 11 paper on one side only, and put FFA award folder in the correct order. So make sure it's all in the correct order. It's put in an FFA award folder. You're taking care of that. I think there may be some provisions this year. I don't know if they're accepting them. I think they're completely accepting them online. So that's probably a different rule that I need to take out of this. But just be aware of that. Be aware of the processes in terms of what that looks like. Add supporting documents, signed recommendations letter for only on one page and the personal page, in proper order at the end of the application. Print both pages on regular 8.5 by 11 paper. And again, I think these are all submitted electronically, so you don't have to worry about that as much, but just make sure that you're not, because they will print these off eventually. I know they'll send them digitally to the judges as well, but you want to make sure that it's not your text isn't being cut off in any way. Do not put cover letter, protective plastic. All information again ends December 31st, 2019. Did not use any 2020 information in terms of hours, skills, dollars, awards, activities. So even if they were elected chapter officer in 2020, that wouldn't be relevant information that you would include like on their resume or anything like that. It's only information up to 2019, and that includes the entire application. So make sure that you're aware of that. You're not including any information that's not that is from 2020 now. In terms of your cover page, Put the year you plan to graduate or the first year out of high school, put in 2019 for that. First year of records may be less than a year. So this is important to know. So if you have students that maybe join late, I know there's lots of different variation in terms of how maybe the first year of ag works for some students. Maybe they only get a 9 weeks, maybe they get a full semester, maybe it's an entire year, but your first year of records may be less than a year. So that's fine if you on your application. You don't really have to explain that as much. That's pretty common for most applications. So you can actually allow that to continue to have applications. Sorry, I just accidentally moved forward. So examples: applying in dairy placement, SAE on dairy. Smith Dairy Farm started in fall 2016 when enrolling in ag ed. It continued through 2019. These performance reviews pages, a lot of times, again, they're very general. People aren't specific. Try to provide specific numbers, percentages, all those types of things that you're really, so that you can really determine how much growth has happened in this actual Proficiency Award application. Be sure to answer all questions related to only the specific Proficiency Award area. That's really important. So sometimes you'll see somebody in dairy production, let's say, and they're claiming their application is entrepreneurship, but they also have this job that relates to dairy production. If you're only applying for the entrepreneurship area, then only include information from that entrepreneurship SAE. Don't include all the placement type information, because that's not going to be relevant, and that's going to bog down the reviewers, and it's going to make them confused. And so try to be as clear cut as possible. Now, if you're submitting one that's 50% placement, 50% entrepreneurship, that's a different scenario. And so you can include both of those. You just need to be specific about which activities relate to the entrepreneurship side, which ones relate to the placement side. And also, again, you can toggle that switch between what percentage of entrepreneurship and on what percentage of placement it is. It needs to have pretty significant, if you're going to submit an application that has both, it needs to probably be at least 40% in one of those areas, I would say, to really be competitive. So if you're submitting an entrepreneurship 90%, 10% placement, I would just leave off the placement, because you're going to make yourself a weaker application in terms of the reviewers. So those are just some kind of key things to know. If you have a very robust, placement as well as entrepreneurship, that's fine. You know what I mean? That you definitely want to speak to that. But if one is very much more dominant, then I would only highlight the dominant one. When I ask for one item, only list and explain one. Best to have accomplishments be measurable, so that accomplishments can be explained with specific numbers if possible. So always provide as many numbers in text as well as in your reporting as possible. For placement programs, consider listing 3 or more specific job responsibilities that are part of each employer that the applicant actually worked for. So make sure that you have, those 3 areas that you can have there. Don't just put 1 or 2. Try to provide all 3 if you can, so that you're really demonstrating how much growth has happened and how those job responsibilities are really, important to that particular student. Each year, add or change job responsibilities. And this is another mistake I see a lot of on placement applications. They'll just put the same job skills and responsibilities year after year after year. That's not what they're wanting to see on placement applications. They're wanting to see some growth and evolution. And so it's fine if you start off with some basic skills, you know what I mean? But they want to see you work up to those higher order skills. So if you're, for example, working in a greenhouse, yeah, it's going to be important when you first start to water and those kinds of things. And by year 4, you may still be watering, but that's not an important part of your job anymore. Maybe you're making scientific, discoveries or something, like you're doing some comparisons in terms of looking at different fertilizers. And so you're doing research and collecting data. That's a more higher order skill that you're going to report. And so the watering and transplanting and stuff like that is more lower order, and not as, much skill is needed into that specifically. And so you want to show that growth in terms of how complicated those particular skills can be. Be sure that your SAE records document hours worked, either paid or unpaid. So be sure and provide both of those, but make sure they don't exceed child labor laws. Again, that's going to get you marked as a participant really, really quickly at the national level. Only put SAE jobs, hours, and wages that are part of the specific award area. We've talked about that again. So if you have something, if you're applying for, you know, turf grass management or some horticulture or something like that, don't put something in there from beef production or something. That's not relevant information. This is another important one. I've seen this on some applications. Do not show any taxes paid as part of your expenses. So we realize that you pay taxes, and that's really good. And you know, if you get it to the final four, you can bring documentation of how you actually figured in those taxes, but you don't need to report those on your actual record book. That's not part of the expenses that are required as part of your job. And so that's what they're wanting to know on the actual application. But if you do pay taxes, then I would bring those records into your interview so that you can show that and to be able to explain and walk them through those specific aspects of that. So that, and if you get into the final four, that can be a really, you know, something that sets you apart, but that's not something that you really need to include on the actual application in terms of expenses, is those actual taxes paid. Excuse me, entrepreneurship programs. Only put SAE projects that are part of the specific award area. Be sure that any non-cash expenses, barters, or transfer match to non-cash expenses versus non-cash income. So I know there's probably a lot of students that their parents may pay for their feed for their livestock or whatever that may be. That's fine. That's, we, you know, all reviewers understand that that's very common, but you need to make sure that you're showing how they're working to pay off that trade or whatever. You need to be able to explain how that works in text, and then also when you're reporting your records. So make sure that you accurately portray that it's explained. But again, it's okay. You don't want to you don't have to lie and say that the kid buys everything if they're not. That's not a realistic thing. So make sure that you're reporting that appropriately and that everything looks legit. If review shows in any year on the income expense page, be sure the inventory changes are properly calculated in the records. Again, that's just something that you're going to have to go back and review for when you're going through and editing your document. But if it shows review, you need to see how that, what needs to be changed in your actual records to make that not show reviewed anymore, and instead say met. If trading labor expenses, etc., make sure that to explain this in your application. I've already kind of went over that a little bit. And this is another important piece of this, learning outcomes and efficiency factors. A lot of people try to breeze through this really quickly and are really vague about it. This is actually worth quite a bit of points when you look at your rubric. And so I would spend quite a bit of time on this page of your learning outcomes and efficiency factors. They're putting more and more emphasis on this at the national level. And so make sure that you have all 5 listed if you can. I would highly recommend that you use all the space that you've provided. And then in your entrepreneurship areas, be sure that you're using efficiency factors. So things like feed efficiency, rate of gain, yield per acre, cost per acre, all those things need to be laid out. So if you are growing crops, you need to be, you know, talking about your yields. You need to be talking about your gains, all that kind of stuff. If you're having livestock, that feed efficiency, how much you're putting in, how much you're getting out in terms of your actual, you know, income and that kind of stuff. So make sure those efficiency factors are being hit in those entrepreneurship applications. That's a really important piece of this, and that you can really demonstrate your knowledge and skills through those applications if you're able to put that into your actual work there. Placement areas, use only learning outcomes, but be very specific as what was actually learned again. So I always recommend, I know you guys are teachers, and so you're probably familiar with Bloom's taxonomy. That's how we write objectives. The same goes for these learning outcomes. I would start with one of those action verbs from Bloom's. Try to get one of the higher order thinking skills, not one of those just knowledge or comprehension ones, but like creation, really going through and synthesizing information or something like that. Go through that verb list and make sure that they are, you know, really showing these action verbs in terms of what those look like. So go back and review Bloom's taxonomy. If you're not familiar with it, you can Google it. It's a whole list of action verbs. And that's how I would start every single outcome, is with an action verb to really sell your application. I think that's going to set you apart and demonstrate that you're achieving these higher order thinking skills through the actual Proficiency Award application. Again, these Proficiency Award tips, all career pathways, AF&R pathways, are listed in the Proficiency Award handbook. make sure that you have some type of AF&R pathway listed. Every single student's project should be tied to some type of AF&R pathway. It's listed on page 11. If you're not familiar with those, then definitely look those up before you submit your application. It's nothing that you have to really get super deep into, but you need to make sure that you have that connection to some type of AF&R pathway. So that's agriculture, food, and natural resources pathways. And that's what governs all curriculum for all states. And so those are objectives that all ag ed institutions, all states are trying to follow and align with in terms of AF&R pathways. And I realize we probably don't do that as much here, but that's something at the national level that's heavily stressed. Okay, photos. As crazy as it sounds, photos are super important. They're not very important in terms of the grading rubric. You don't get a whole lot of points for them, or as much as you probably would think. But photos are kind of the first impression. Most people, when they're judging, flip to the photos. They just flip to the application and start looking at the photos so they can get a general feel for what your actual application is about. And so even though they're not worth a whole lot of points on the rubric, they can really influence how people perceive your application overall. First thing I want you to know is that there should be no safety issues whatsoever. So if you're working in a shop or with equipment, you should have on safety glasses in the proper PPE, or that's going to get you disqualified or marked as participant really, really quickly. So make sure that you have all safety regulations fulfilled, that there's no safety issues, or your application will get kicked really, really quickly. So make sure that you're doing that first and foremost. Just some quick tips here, and I'm sure you guys know these, but if you don't, then this may be helpful to your application. Make sure your students are wearing different clothes in your application if you can. Have different shirts and caps that they change out in their pictures if possible. And I realize this isn't possible for all different applications. I always give the example. I had a student that had a beehive, and so she had to have PPE on, which was the full white suit, headgear, all that kind of stuff for her SAE, anytime she did any harvesting or worked with her bees. And so that was appropriate. And so most of our pictures, she had that PPE on in terms of her beekeeping hive, because that's how she kept herself safe. And so in that instance, that, she had very similar clothes on in every picture, but that's just what you had to have to be able to really demonstrate that you were being safe in terms of your SAE. And so make sure that you're doing that if at all possible. But if you can change out jackets and caps and that kind of stuff, if you're doing something with horticulture or something, then that would be a lot easier to do. Also move closer to your subject when possible. Close-ups are always better than distant shots. So it's okay if you have a distant shot or two, but don't have every single one of them to where you can't even see the student in it. And I realize that there are some pictures that you need to demonstrate for like crops and fields and stuff like that, that you need to show that are going to be more widespread. But, as a general rule, it's better to have those close-up pictures whenever possible. Also, photo captions. The photo captions that I see are usually very weak in terms of applications. And most photo captions they start off like, in this photo I am, or here is a picture of me. Those are bad starts to photo captions. Those are very low work. You can tell that they haven't put a lot of thought into them. You want to demonstrate your higher level skills in your photos and even have that reflected in your captions. And so make sure that you're having these extension of skills, competency, knowledge, and all these, you want to tie in figures and facts into your photo captions as much as possible. So work in numbers, statistics, anything like that, that you've also reported in your record books, that you can in your photo captions. That will be really, really good. So for example, additional research, collecting and analyzing data to solve a problem. Only one photo per page. This is a big no-no too. Have seen in the past where people try to put multiple photos. They'll do some like Photoshop something and they'll have 2 different photos. You can't do that or your application will get disqualified automatically. And so on the photo pages, you can only have 1 photo per page, so that you don't want to get disqualified for trying to put 2 photos on 1 page or something and try to like have half and half taken up or something like that. They don't allow that on the application, even though I realize that it could probably be helpful and to some of you to be able to do that and show like growth and that kind of stuff. I wish they would allow you to do that, but they don't. So don't do it in terms of, trying to keep your application from being, thrown out. So again, don't say, and this is a photo of, the judges will know it's a photo. Use action-oriented captions. Pruning shrubs will increase X or Y or Z or something like that. And then I've also already kind of hit on the unsafe facilities or practices. Make sure that you really scrutinize every photo and then it's, properly meeting every safety guideline, that you have safety goggles and that kind of stuff while repairing all equipment. So make sure that you have all of that kind of fleshed out and really evaluated before you get into this very far. Another thing that I see is a lot of people don't provide a personal page. This is another big no-no that's gonna kind of not get you to the cream of the crop. So always provide a personal page if you can. You have one additional page that you can provide. Use this to enhance your application and highlight something different, unique about your SAE and the Ag Ed FFA activities that are directly related to that specific area. So I always put personal page at the very top of this, just so that if the reviewers know what it is that they're looking at, they understand that it's to be counted as your personal page, that kind of stuff. And you can only have it on one side of the page, so it can't be double-sided or anything like that. So it can only be on one side of the page for your personal page. Personal page can include a second reference letter. So if you have somebody else that's really important that you've worked with through like service learning or something like that, that would be a really critical community partner, then maybe it's important to include a second reference letter for them. That would be able to be counted as a personal page, but you can do other things as well on this. And so a popular way, and this is typically how I did it when I was submitting applications with students, is we would provide an additional 3 or 4 new pictures. So they don't need to be pictures that have already been presented in the application. They need to be new, and then you can present additional captions and details into different phases of your SAE that you can highlight those a little bit better and just make it a little bit more eye-appealing for everybody. Some other things that I've seen that have been really effective on your personal page are things like advertisements for your business. If you have any types of flyers or something like that, that would be a good thing to include as a personal page. Sometimes I've seen business cards. Those are also really helpful in terms of marketing yourself. And then any type of large or important contract. So I had a student that was doing swine production one time, and he was a national finalist. And so he is still a very big swine producer there in Oklahoma and does really good with show pigs. And so he sold a boar for thousands and thousands of dollars. And so we provided that as a piece of evidence in terms of his personal page to kind of show that receipt, just to show that he was legit in terms of his actual SAE and that we weren't trying to claim something, but he was pretty well known, so we didn't really have to worry about it. But that was just another way that we could provide some authenticity for everything that we were claiming in the application. Some final thoughts I have for you guys, and then I'll just open it up to some questions that you may have, is have additional people double check spelling, grammar, and punctuation. I know it's sometimes, we get, really picky about our writing, and we get, our feelings hurt, that kind of stuff, but make sure that you're having other people, especially like English teachers, people that really know grammar, that kind of stuff, to really look through your application and give you some feedback on those, because you don't want to send in something to the national level that's not grammatically correct or that has a lot of errors or something like that. So make sure that you're checking all those. Also, I highly recommend that you type everything in a Word document and then copy and paste it over, because a lot of times those applications won't catch your misspelled words or something like that. So that's another way to catch your mistakes. Another program that you can use is Grammarly, Grammerly. I recommend that to a lot of my students. It's a way to help kind of catch some grammar type issues, spelling issues, that kind of stuff. It tells you if you have like a run-on sentence or need to, check some different aspects of your work. I think part of it has a free version. There are pieces of it I think you have to pay for, but for like kind of some general stuff, you could probably use Grammarly as a way to kind of check some of your grammar and stuff before you actually submit your application. So if you haven't used that before, then I highly recommend that you do that, just so that you can catch some errors. Be sure to print an entire application at one time, so all pages have the same version, number, date, and timestamp. So again, these are going to be submitted electronically, so you don't have to worry about that as much. If a change is made on any cover page, the entire application must be reprinted again. Triple check that info is typed on application is not cut off when the application is printed. So definitely print it off, even though it's going to be submitted digitally, print that off and make sure that nothing's being cut off in terms of your writing, because sometimes it's hard to tell on an actual computer. Watch the maximum number of characters allowed in a typed in space. So if it says 250 word character max, then you have to abide by that, or it's going to cut your text off and the reviewers are never going to see that text. And so make sure that you are reviewing that stuff, that your information isn't cut off. I know it gets really annoying to have to keep printing things off and checking and making sure, but those are just how we get high quality applications. And then be sure all signatures are present and checklist shows met on everything before you submit it. So it needs to say met. If it doesn't say not met, then you'll get marked as a participant really quickly and your application won't be reviewed by the full committee. So that's the main things that I had for you guys. So I'm going to stop sharing now, and I'm just going to open it up to any questions you have. Sorry, I think I have a question. Hope Berry says, also do not use watermark photos. Yes. Yeah. So if they're not paid for by a photographer, then you can get disqualified for that. So thanks for bringing that up. That's definitely something that you want to check, especially for like livestock photos or something like that. If you've won at a big show or something, I've seen them use those and they're watermarked. You may, a way to go about using a watermarked photo is that you can say that you do have permission from the actual person, and then you may actually include that permission as part of your personal page or something that you could include on that. But in the actual caption, you could say, photo used with permission by whoever that person would be or that company is. And so that you can use that, but you have to acknowledge that you've gotten permission to use those before you use those watermarked photos. So that's a great point, Hope. Thanks for bringing that up. That's something that I did forget to bring up as well. Any questions from you guys in terms of getting your specific applications prepared? So I just wanted to provide you guys a few minutes to kind of ask some individual questions.
I do have one question.
Okay.
My dad is a plumber, and in my application, it says, because mine is vegetable production, that's the application I'm submitting.
Yeah.
And my single greatest challenge is weather.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I have a 5-acre pond, and my dad is a plumber, like I said. And I put in here that it says, my dad is a plumber and installed a pump in my papa's pond during the summer of my 2nd year. The pump feeds the main water line in each row of my garden and is attached to the lines. I can cut the lines on or off as needed. I purchased the pump, pipe, and fittings with my earnings. My dad gifted me his labor at $750. Where do I need to show my dad's labor at?
Yes, that would be kind of a barter and trade that you would need to show in your record books. And so you can say, you're going to need to provide that information about your actual, the irrigation system you're using from your pond or whatever it is there. And so you can say irrigation system, labor, and then trade, and then whatever that deal was, that $750, however that worked out, it was like a donation to you or whatever. But you do need to put that in your record books for sure.
Because I put it in my record books.
Mm-hmm.
I put it in the non-cash expenses, the transferred, bartered, or SAE labor exchange.
Uh-huh.
And is that where it needs to go out?
Yes, that would be correct. Uh-huh.
Okay, I just want to make sure that was correct.
Definitely.
And then on like the pathway and name and descriptions and stuff and the size and scope,
mm-hmm.
I do a spring, summer, and fall. So I broke it up into like my spring vegetables would be like I did 2, like say 15, mm-hmm. Actually it's like 3 200-foot rows of tomatoes, 3 200-foot rows of squash and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. And that's the spring.
Yeah.
And then for like summer, I have it broke up into like spring, summer, and fall, describing each one of them.
Yeah. And
I didn't know if that's like the correct way to do that, or do I need to combine them all into one?
No, I think that's great. I think the way that you have it is good. I would probably put somewhere maybe like in your introductory paragraph or something be sure and explain that, you know, Louisiana has a much longer growing season than a lot of states in the United States. And so
Yeah.
you're able to get, you know, multiple crops and that kind of stuff. And so that's fine. But some people may be confused by that. And so, and I know that's silly to say that, but, you know, if you have somebody from Wisconsin that's reviewing your application, then they're probably not going to realize that we have multiple, you know, types of crops and growing seasons and that kind of stuff. And so you might just be transparent about that, how you can grow multiple types of crops in different parts of the seasons and that kind of stuff in Louisiana specifically. And that's why you're kind of organizing in that way, just because they may not be familiar with how our systems work here.
Yeah, that's what I was doing because I just didn't know if that's was the correct way or not.
Definitely.
So,
You have to be as elementary as possible because, you know, again, these people aren't familiar with how ag works here in Louisiana. And so you just have to make sure and kind of lead them, think of them like sixth graders or something like that when you're trying to explain something. Awesome. Any other
Thank you.
questions? That was great. Awesome. Well, if there's no more questions, then I will end it for today. If you have something specific that you want me to look over or something, I'm happy to do that. I know your applications are due here pretty quickly. And so, but again, I just highly recommend that you edit, and try to get those as, you know, pristine as possible. Highly recommend that you reach out to maybe English teachers or something to look over those to help catch all those grammatical errors. Again, Grammarly is another good resource to help you catch some of those tiny errors that you may be missing in your application, that kind of stuff. So happy to help you guys. I know that you guys are really busy and there's lots of changes and that kind of stuff with coronavirus, but hopefully we can get these submitted, and I'm looking forward to seeing all the success you guys have.
Dr. Roberts,
Yes, ma'am.
I'm sorry to jump in here at the last minute.
Yeah, you're good.
Another good resource, or if you have ag teacher friends from other states that have been finalists or national winners, those are good resources to serve as reviewers for your applications too. And sometimes you can sweet talk your friends out of copies of their winning applications.
Sometimes, yeah. Sometimes they're guarded about them, but that's a great point. Yeah, thank you for including that. Awesome. Well, I'm going to get off here then and let you guys get back to your days. Thank you for tuning in, and I'll send the video here to Cade so that everybody else can, you can review this, and then I'm going to send out the PowerPoint and the email in just a few minutes as well, so you can have that to review. All right. Thanks for tuning in, everybody. We'll talk to you later.